I chose to say step in, particularly because I know we have a program planned for this afternoon dealing with stress and the Bible. Those who were there last 2 weeks ago, can you just wave your hand, please? Let me see. Right. The plan was for us this afternoon to look at how practical ways of dealing with stress. Because last time we spoke about it, we realized that Christians undergo a lot of stress too. And it's a shame that Christendom also share in this tendency to stigmatize people who struggle with any kind of stress. We're talking about emotional stress here. But then we realize, even us as Christians here within our church, we all have times we go through stressful situations. And we even talked about how Jesus himself, in the Garden of Gethsemane, was sweating blood when he was thinking, Father, can this cup pass over me? But not my will, but thy will be done. Right, so this morning, I've decided to dig a little deeper into the biblical essence of stress. So the message that we're going to hear this afternoon, when you are listening to it, please, I'm begging you, think, how is this affecting me? Just myself. That's you. Don't think about how this is very related to that Mrs. Briggs or Mr. Jack. Think very focused thoughts about how is this affecting me. So stress and the Bible. How did toxic stress enter our world? When God created everything, was it good? The first book of the Bible, Genesis 1, almost every verse has, and God saw that it was. So he created the sun, the moon, the elements in the sky, the clouds, the animal, and God saw that it was. Was there anything that God said wasn't good? When you go to chapter 2, I'm going to ask that question again. When you go to chapter 2, was there anything that God said wasn't very good? Oh, I can see Susanna nodding her head, shaking her head no. God saw man and said, it was not good for man to be alone. So whilst everything was good, everything was good. But at one point, God saw, oh no, actually, this is one thing that was not so good. It was not good for man to be alone. Right. Okay, we are still talking about stress here. You were just wondering where I'm going with talking about man not being alone. I'm not saying wives stress husbands out. No, that's not what I'm saying. But the point I'm trying to make here is, you see, when God created heaven and placed man in the Garden of Eden, he ensured that all their needs were met. So they had no unmet needs. This is very important. Just place it in mind. God ensured that all man's needs were met. So we're looking at all his spiritual needs were met. All his emotional needs were met. All his physical needs were met. And the interesting thing at the time, because man was still in a holy form, because they had the covering of God around them, the righteousness of God around them. Okay. So there are certain things that they were not subjected to as we are subjected to now. But still God met all their needs. So they had nothing they needed for. They had nothing they wanted. Except that I said, God saw man on his own, being alone, and thought, that's not good. And gave him Eve. So as I just said, man had no needs. Do you believe that at the time? Because before I move on, so we know we're on the same page. You see, while man walked with God in perfect unity, all his needs were met. But then, sin broke in and brought in toxic stress. How is sin related to stress? So human beings were contented and happy at the time. We were very, very happy with whatever God had given them. Even though they knew God had said, that tree in the middle of the garden, don't touch. They were still contented. They were going about their days in happiness and enjoying things. But then the devil pointed things to Eve's attention. He pointed out something that she did not have. This knowledge of good and evil. And I don't know if anybody can relate to this. Sometimes you'll just be going through your days, and all of a sudden you think you need something. And you really, really think you need it. And sometimes, if it's that bad, if it's that bad, you might even dream about it. You really feel you need this thing, and let's say you're married, you probably don't not let your wife rest or your husband rest because you need this thing. Eve felt she needed what the devil was selling. She felt she needed it so bad that for the first time in her life, she started to experience pressure. There's a kind of pressure that they never had before. And this is the beginning of toxic stress, toxic pressure entering into the scene. She looked at the fruit and she realized she wanted it badly. She wanted it so badly. In fact, she needed it and she believed she could not survive without it. She could not survive because, you see, the devil has told to them that, you see, God knows the value of this knowledge of good and evil. And he's hiding it from you. He's allowed you to touch everything else, but that one thing he's hiding it from you. Because God knows the value to have for you. So at this point, mankind relinquished the gift of eternity, the gift of peace, continuous peace, the gift of, I don't know how it would have felt, just continuous enjoyment. And as a result of sin, all of a sudden man realized that he had so many unmet needs. It's like it all of a sudden became so clear that what God was doing, the provision God was making, was actually quite massive. I don't know if you ever heard the saying, you don't know what you have until you've lost it. All of a sudden they realized that they had to work hard to secure their own survival, to secure their own protection. And this is how stress, pressure, beginning to seep in. Because even if you think about it here as Christians, you go through times where you wonder, is God listening? Has anybody been through that? Is God listening? I'm going through some difficulties now. Why is he allowing me to suffer? Why is he allowing me to go through these difficulties? Unfortunately, this was something that we have inherited as a result of Adam and Eve's fall. We have to go through these pressures. They had become so weak, vulnerable, and naked. And they realized that they now had to take on more responsibilities for their own protection, take on more responsibility for their own needs. And the first thing they did was to go and look for fig leaves because they realized they were naked. Suddenly it becomes clear, we are vulnerable. So they look for leaves, cover themselves up. And I'm just thinking that's very sad because here comes God. Do you think creating the world was an easy thing? I know we say it's an easy thing because God is always a God of impossibility. But God had to take decisions that he knew were risky. He put all his time into creating this perfect world. Put Adam and Eve into that garden. And he loved them. And here comes God who loved them so much, walking in the cool of the morning, looking for his loved ones. And what were they doing? Oh, is everybody sleeping? They were hiding. They were hiding. Why? Ashamed, afraid. They were naked, ashamed. The Bible says they were afraid because of when God called out. We read it in the. They became wise. That's what Desmond says. Right. They were afraid. They became wise to evil. All of a sudden, they realized that when you play with evil, evil doesn't treat you like a friend. When you play with evil, evil doesn't treat you like a friend. So all of a sudden, they realized that they were vulnerable. But more so, they realized that God will be displeased with them. And this was a God who loved them so much, but now they had fear for him. Something that they never had before. I don't know if anybody who's been parents here have experienced it. One day I walked into my house and my daughter just ran to the door. Daddy, don't come in here, don't come in here. She ran back in. I said, what is going on there? My son said, oh no, daddy, it's Tammy. I haven't even seen anything. What's going on there? I walked in there and all of them, they were playing with all these electronic tools, all my tool sets they were playing with. Because Adam and Eve did wrong, they were fearing the consequence and they were fearing the treatment they would get from God. And this is stress, pressure. And because of the fall, they were now going to experience death. They were now regularly experiencing deterioration. Deterioration had already started. As soon as they disobeyed, physically they started to decay. Emotionally they started to decay. And spiritually too, they started to decay. And it's interesting, well, we often just think of the spiritual and the physical. But emotionally, the mental faculties, their mental abilities, their emotional abilities started to go downhill too. So before the fall, man had no fear of God. Now he was so fearful. Then toxic stress all of a sudden starts to develop from all angles. I'm just kind of imagining how God was seeing the scene. We are looking at the scene, or we are thinking about it or reading about it. We don't see the same picture God is seeing. You know, for God, 1,000 days is like 1,000 years, I said today. 1,000 years is like one day. Right. So 1,000 years is like one day. So in his own experience, while he's seeing this, he's seeing the decay that sin is bringing. And he's seeing everything he has formed with so much love just being tarnished. And so you feel the pressure that toxic stress, toxic stress. I know, as I'm saying sin and toxic stress, they are not the same thing, but sin brought in that toxic pressure that wasn't there before. It started developing from every angle. Now the lion is eating the lamb. The lion is trying to kill the human beings. Now human beings are killing each other. Cain and Abel. Now women start to be jealous. Men start to be jealous. People start to feel guilty. All these negative emotions that they never experienced before starting to develop because there was a deterioration, there was a decay happening, both physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Man wanted more control, but then with more control came more responsibility. And it's even so true today, because if you think about it, when you were in your parents' house, life was so easy, wasn't it? You probably thought life was difficult because they didn't let you have your ways. But once you stepped out and had to be responsible for your own self, you start to see that with more control means more responsibility. So they stepped out of God's umbrella covering. All of a sudden they realized they had more responsibilities to carry. Under the total power and control of God, all his needs were being met. He was secure both physically and mentally. But with the entrance of disobedience, he had to now start meeting his own needs. But to meet his own needs meant he had to push harder. He had to work harder. The Bible talked about God saying to man, now you have to till the ground to eat. He wasn't doing that before. Now the thorns and thistles had to be part of your food. Before Eden, although God had created rest, he had created the Sabbath as a resting day, man never had fatigue or tiredness like we have now. So all of a sudden he realized that there was a limit to his ability. He could push himself so much, but all of a sudden he realized there's a level that he could push himself to, that if he passes that, and doesn't respect that level, things start to happen, things start to go wrong. Who's the strongest man in the room? Quiet. Right. If we had somebody here who's the strongest man, and we asked him to lift all the chairs in the room, would there be a limit where he probably won't be able to lift anymore? I can't see anybody in this room that probably will be able to lift all our chairs. Yeah, no. Right. I may be wrong, though. Because the men are looking at me. What does he think I am? Okay. So man suddenly realized, okay, there's a limit that he has to respect. And the problem is if we don't know what that limit is, we regularly push ourselves to that limit. And things start to go wrong, emotionally, physically, and mentally. Sorry, what do you call it? Spiritually, physically, and emotionally. Now, those of you who were here last week, how did you define stress? I can hear somebody say, I forgot. Right, stress is that intangible mental and physical force that limits a person's ability to respond to life's situations in the ways that they usually would. It's the limit to which we can push ourselves before things start to go wrong. So far what we have said, let me just kind of rephrase. So sin entered our world, made us vulnerable and weak. This vulnerability and weakness drives us into action because we now know we have to protect ourselves, we have to fend for ourselves, we have to provide for ourselves. But that action of providing for ourselves and fending for ourselves exhausts us. Except those of you who have a cushy job that doesn't exhaust you. But to be honest, even a job where you're sitting down and using your brain, sometimes that's even more exhausting sometimes. Right. But now we have to know that if we respect God's natural laws and rest after work, or relax after doing something mentally strenuous, then we have the chance of keeping in that healthy zone, safe zone. I don't know if those of you who are here remembered what we talked about, the safe zone, what the safe zone was. Remember this picture? So the safe zone. You can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? People are sleeping. Right, the safe zone. Where is my mouse? I can't see my mouse. Oh, there we are. Between that and that. Okay. But I just want to mention that if there's anybody in the audience who's beginning to think that stress is not relevant to me, please think twice. Because you see, stress is a universal problem. It's a problem that exists, and if you try to ignore it, whether you ignore it or take full note of it, it will still affect you. If you don't, so what I'm saying here is, if you want to say, okay, I don't have stress, stress doesn't affect me. The problem is, it doesn't respect people. It affects you. It affects everybody. So it's wise to start to take note of it. How does stress affect me? How would I even know how it affects me? I think last week, where's Judith? She's not here. A few people were saying they didn't even realize that they were stressed. So, when we give more control over to God, because you see, when God had the whole control, were we stressed? In Garden of Eden, were we stressed? Right. But sin made God have to relinquish some of this control over to us. You have to now look after yourself. I was looking after you totally. Now you have to look after yourself. But unfortunately, what we human beings often want to do is to take the whole control. Because God only gave us some of the control, He still keeps some of the control. Right. But often as Christians, we want to take all that control. And sometimes we are worse than people who are not Christians, who don't know, because we are not giving God all the control that we can give Him. So the first place to start is learning to know how we can give God control, give God at least some of the control that we should be giving Him. Because this helps to reduce toxic stress, but not by a mysterious means. See, I believe in the power of God. I believe that through God's power, He can achieve anything. He can create something out of nothing. But also, I believe God has put in natural laws that govern things. We respect those laws, things will be naturally better for us. We fail to respect those laws, we bring a lot of difficulties on ourselves. So, God was He made us, didn't He? And anybody, if you make anything, you're more likely to know how that thing kicks, how that thing functions. So God was our maker, and in making us, He knows what makes us tick. He knows what breaks us. And in His Word, and this is what we said last week, in His Word, He has put in so much information to help both you and I from not going down that route of overstressing ourselves. The truth, you shall know all the truth, and the truth, you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That's John 8:32. So, not just spiritual truth. And I think this is where, as Christians, we seem to just focus on the spiritual truth only. There is physical truth, and there's emotional truth also. And a lot of this can also be found in the Bible. And this is where we err as Christians. We leave the emotional out, Many of us would respect the physical and maybe pay attention to the physical because there's been a lot of canvassing around physical health issues that are related to stress. But quite often we leave the emotional out. And last 2 weeks ago, we were looking at the emotional stress. And we're looking at how to determine if, as a person, you struggle with any form of emotional stress. You can remember that, can't you? Okay. But just to mention, for anybody who's interested in watching that particular presentation, is now on our website. So if anybody wants to find out from Kevin, if they want to watch that particular presentation. So like I say, our last study, we looked at emotional stress, and we were saying that emotional stress is a product of our interpretation and our reaction to circumstances. So if Suzanne was to slap me in the face now, the way I react to that determines whether I will be stressed emotionally or not. When Jesus was spat in the face, what did he do? When they put Jesus on the cross and nailed him to the cross and put spears in his side, what did he say about the people? Forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. And he's our model, he's our role model. Right. So if Susanna was to slap me in the face now, my natural sinful inclination would be to slap her back. You remember seeing this also? We're looking at this. I decided to put stress in 3 colors. These 3 colors helps you to know. It depicts different ways people think and react, and the forms of stress that they're experiencing. All that is 3 colors. Green stress is really to do with anxiety, fear. Blue stress is really to do with sadness and depression. So if you're prone to being sad a lot. Red stress is related to being irritable, angry, and snappy. So if you do that a lot, then red stress. I'll just kind of read briefly each one. So green stress, you find yourself being prone to being embarrassed easily. Make a lot of negative predictions about the future. Look into the future. Think a lot about things possibly going wrong, and you worry a lot about things. You avoid things quite often as a result of this prediction of things going wrong. And you find yourself procrastinating a lot. I'm just reading through briefly. Blue stress. You find yourself criticizing yourself a lot about things. Last time I mentioned doing a performance, maybe coming out here and doing a performance, and you can't see any of the positives. You're only seeing the negatives all the time. And you're always looking down on yourself. A lot of times, people who will struggle with blue stress, if you have to do something well and you have to say well done, they feel very funny about taking gratitude. Also prone to shame. There's a lot of self-pity. Ruminate. The idea with ruminate is think a lot about how people have hurt them. There's a lot of thinking about how people have hurt them, and that makes them feel rather sad. What we find with red stress also, people with red stress will also ruminate, but they often get angry with the rumination. It's about how people have hurt them also, but there's a lot of anger as a result. Right, so with red stress, as I said, being impatient, also tendency to feel embarrassed, and when something happens and they feel embarrassed and they feel it's because of somebody else's actions, that creates a lot of anger too. Tendency to be short-tempered, and they most likely see what everybody else is not doing right. I don't know if you've heard this saying. They'll be the kind of person who will go to watch a football match. They know exactly how everybody should play the football, but if you were to put them in the field, they won't know how to play anything. Right? Okay, I know I'm making jest of this, but what we found when we did our work last time is that sometimes we find ourselves in all 3. Sometimes we find ourselves more in one than the other. Why am I trying to pinpoint this. I'm trying to kind of waken people's mind up to see that, okay, as a Christian, we are expected to live in a certain way. We're expected to have certain characteristics. And quite often as Christians, especially if we are trying our best to remain Christians, we keep finding we are trying to remain Christians and trying to do things right, but Mrs. So-and-so just comes and says something and just trips me up. And it just seems to keep happening that as long as I'm trying, but I just keep getting things wrong. There's often stress working there. So if I look at what the Bible here says here, this is, I can't see the top, there's 1 Corinthians 13, talking about love. I'm going to read the whole thing through if you don't mind. So if I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have a prophetic power and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant. It's not rude. It does not insist in its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all, believes all, hopes all, endures all. And I'm going to read the next one, which is Galatians 5:22. But the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. You just heard me read through all that. If you think back to the colors of stress, you will see that these are almost opposites. Yeah? Did you see that? Because these are the things that God wants us to be able to break from. Because the closer we draw to Him, the more people should be able to see the fruits of the Spirit. But if stress is paramount in our lives, whatever color of stress, what we will find is we will fight doubly hard to be Christians. We'll fight doubly hard to be Christians because this, we will either, if we are with the red stress, we'll find somebody always stepping on our toes. People always getting on our nerves. If we are with the blue stress, we'll find it seems like no matter how hard I try, I just keep getting kicked back. Everything I put my hand to, just keep getting kicked back. And our focus will be so strongly on that we can't see beyond that because of blue stress. If it's green stress, we will find that we are in a job, we want to leave the job, but we can't leave the job because we feel if I leave the job, it will probably be the worst situation I'm going to find. Right? Hence, we can't take risks. Right? So God, in His Word, He's trying to stir us up into, and build us up into that person who is well fortified to have a good experience in life. So this is what God is trying to do. But because of sin, the pressures of life plus the efforts of the enemy is constantly trying to drag us down. Now, in God's Word, you will find so many scriptures that it's just now that I understand about stress. I understand about mental health. That I can see those messages everywhere in the Bible. God is constantly trying to uplift His children with messages to help them protect themselves from the effects of stress. And what's now more interesting? The world out there, I'm not talking about Christendom now, scientific, academic world, they've left us behind. They've left us behind because now, this is one thing that it struck me when I found out. I was reading, I was doing my preparation for one particular essay I was writing at one time. And it really surprised me. I found an academic book on compassion. Compassion, and they were using compassion to help people recover from anxiety problems, depression problems, anger problems. Actually, they were using compassion to help people recover from what we as mental health practitioners consider to be the toughest of mental health conditions. I don't know if anybody here knows about personality disorders. Borderline personality disorder probably will be classed as one of the most difficult of mental health, emotional, which is neurotic disorders to work with. They've actually found that work on compassion help these people to break through. And so there's this particular author, Paul Gilbert. I'm just going to refer to some of his work and just read something he wrote in one of his books. So it says, developing compassion can be a way of bringing our emotions into a helpful balance that increases our sense of well-being. Compassion. I'm saying compassion here, but when you look at compassion and love, and they're very close. Huh? And they're very close. Compassion and love. So this is Paul Gilbert's writing. Remember, Paul Gilbert is not a Christian. As far as I know anyway, he's not a Christian. So developing compassion can be a way of bringing our emotions into a helpful balance that increases our sense of well-being. So these are actually scientific findings. They've done research, they've done trials, a lot of trials, and found that this was helping people. Right. Compassion, and in his description of compassion, Paul Gilbert says, compassion involves making decisions to try to be compassionate. First of all, you have to try and be compassionate. Not just with others, but also be compassionate with yourself. Something about the Bible saying, love God with all your heart and your... Sorry? Love God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and what about love your neighbor? So love God with all your mind, but also love your neighbor as yourself. The principle I'm trying to say here is, as Christians, we have the keys to help us unlock all emotional struggles we go through. No matter what the situation is we are struggling with, no matter how hard the situation is, even if people were right in front of you, killing you, persecuting you, what happened to Stephen? They were stoning him. What did people see on his face? Peace. It doesn't make sense humanly. But what I'm trying to say here is God has put in place the keys in the Bible to instruct us, to help us know that if we have connection, proper connection with this idea of compassion, this idea of love, because he's love. That's what the theme of his entity, love. We understand love for ourselves and love for others, and we walk practically with it. It helps to make life easy, no matter how hard going it is. So this is Paul Gilbert's description of compassion. It involves first of all, taking the decision to be compassionate. Then we make an effort to train our minds to be sensitive to our feelings and thoughts. Compassion involves making a decision to try to be compassionate, to make an effort to be sensitive. Sorry, I've just repeated that twice. Okay. With compassion, we have empathy. Empathy for others, so where we're making an effort to think from their point of view. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. When Jesus was on the cross, because you see, those people who were killing him, did they know what they were doing? From a human perspective, did they know what they were doing? Yeah, they knew what they were doing. They were killing him. They wanted to kill him. Right. But Jesus looked from a different perspective and saw something from a different point of view, because he was in a different level than they were on. They were still thinking very physically, but he was already in a spiritual level with that. And he could see that, okay, Father, forgive them. But they don't realize what they are doing. Somebody comes to me and slaps me in the face. As a Christian, I know that this person doesn't realize what he's doing. Forgive that person. Somebody comes and tries to I just have to be careful the words I use here. Sometimes as leaders in the church, you might find members come and criticize you right to your face. If you start to retaliate back, then you're having no empathy on this person. People will come, people will step on your toes, people will come, people will give you difficulties. But with empathy, you can see beyond just what the person is doing to, Father, forgive this person. This person doesn't know what they're doing, what they're saying. If this person says something and tries to hurt me, let me think, how can I help this person out of the situation? And if you look at the theme of the Bible, when Jesus came, I know before Jesus came and they had that Mosaic rule where a tit for tat business. But when Jesus came, he was saying, love your enemy. Yeah? But here, hold on. You know, I'm still reading from Paul Gilbert's work. This is not a Christian. This is a scientific academic. They're actually people who don't believe in Christianity. Yeah? Do you see what I'm saying here? God has given us those keys, and there are keys that are actually doing quite a lot of miraculous things outside Christendom, while we Christians, we're still lagging behind. In showing empathy, we have to do some work. For example, if someone hurts you, but you realize that they were under enormous stress, then you don't take it personally, you forgive them. Doesn't it sound like you're reading a Christian book? Huh? You forgive them. This is what the Bible has been teaching us. But we often feel that the Bible is teaching us these things for just spirituality. Reality is your emotional well-being, your physical health is all tied in as well. And the more we tune in into what God is trying to teach us in his words, the more we find that on a holistic level, our lives are just much more enjoyable. Okay. So this is that's the reference, the particular book I took it from. That's an introduction to the theory and practice of compassion-focused therapy and compassionate mind training for shame-based difficulties. Okay. And to make it more interesting, I don't know, Kevin, we don't have the internet here, do we? We don't have the internet here. Okay, I just came prepared just in case we can't get the internet. This morning, I just did a quick search on Google, typed in compassion and cortisol. How many people remember cortisol? Cortisol, we talked about cortisol. Cortisol, one of the stress hormones. Right. I just typed in compassion and cortisol just to see, okay, what would I just come up with? Right, compassion and cortisol. I don't know if people can see that. The higher the woman's compassion, this was a particular study. The higher the woman's compassion, the lower their blood pressure. And the lower their cortisol levels. And the higher their beneficial heart rate variability. What am I saying here? You see, when you are struggling, when you have a situation where you have somebody you're bitter with, right? It's affecting your heart. This is not Christian work. This is academic work. I'm still reading here. As I said, I just typed in Google, compassion and cortisol. I think I was going to get Kevin to do it live, but not sure if he was able to. He's able to. Huh? They don't have internet. Okay. And there are just pages and pages of stuff on research on compassion. Okay. But the only one sad thing is that science tries to remove God from the equation. Science is always trying to remove God from the equation. This is always the sad thing. So when you read these works, you find, okay, they're always attributing, when it comes to trying to see, okay, why is this working this way it is? put some kind of evolutionary evidence, trying to remove God from the picture. But we know for decades it's been known that our God is a God of compassion. It is the essence of his existence. It is what makes him up, love. And this is why he says, they shall know that you are mine. Isn't that what it says? Because they can see love within you. I just paraphrased it, I think. All right. God is a God of love. He made us in his image. And if we deviate from love, it makes sense then that we start to deteriorate. Doesn't it? So if we deviate from compassion, it makes sense that we start to deteriorate. Scientists are finding that out now. So I'm going to finish on this note. It should not surprise us that the purposeful practice of love, the purposeful practice of compassion for ourselves and for our fellow men stops us from experiencing toxic stress, stops toxic stress from consuming us. Right. This morning, all we've just done is looked at more evidence of why this is relevant to me as a Christian. Why is this relevant to me as a Christian? I know last week we did some experiments with stress cards, trying to see how many of us in here are stressed. This afternoon, the plan is to look at what can be done about this. How can we do something practical to ensure that we are not subjected to this toxic stress? To ensure that the lives we live is not being complicated furthermore by toxic stress. So hopefully I'll see you all this afternoon. Thank you.